You know that group chat that's 70% unhinged, 30% real life planning? Yep, that's us. We're Alisha and Valentina, and this is the AI, Money, and Girlhood podcast with Kiro, where we talk about what is going on with money, power, and tech, and how we take it back. Hi, everyone. Nick finally found us.
I am here.
You're here. Hi. Thank you so much, Nick and Moraya, for joining Tina and I on the Kiro AI, Money, and Girlhood podcast. We're so excited to have you as one of our special guests. We've had a couple of guest speakers, so thank you for joining us. I'll give like a brief background on how we met and then, hand it over to you to hear a bit about what you're doing right now, how you got into that space, and we're just going to talk. Ready?
Love it.
Let's do it. So I had the privilege of meeting Nick and Moraya through the Cafe Accelerator program. So Cafe is a nonprofit focused on supporting early stage fintechs that want to essentially help LMI communities, low moderate income communities. And Nick and Moraya are the founding team of Calibrate, which is, I'm not even going to say what it is yet. I'll let you both tell everyone the amazing tools that you're building. Just so many synergies in what you guys are focusing on and what we're doing at Kiro. And so thought it would be great to have you on and talk more around the emotional and behavioral side of money, because I think that's something Tina and I have talked about in our previous episodes. And I mean, look, we're not clinicians or therapists or psychologists, but there are some people in this conversation right now who are. And so it'd be great to have, your perspectives. I'll just hand it over to Nick and Moraya if you want to give us brief background, what you're doing now, how you ended up in this space.
Sure.
Amazing.
I'll start because I think it will be helpful for me to give the context and then sort of introduce Moraya as well within that context. So I'm Nick Ashburn. I'm the founder and CEO of Calibrate. And it is an emotional and behavioral fintech platform that helps people manage the emotional, relational, and operational complexity of their lives. And that really is through the financial services firms that they work with. So it's not direct to consumer in that way. It is really working with the financial firms to offer that and really better help the firms understand you, right, as the client and support your outcomes, specifically around financial health, financial security. Do you have all the things that Kiro wants you to support you on, and also your well-being, satisfaction with life and psychological well-being, doing that from a very sort of data-driven and scientific way. But I had a circuitous path to finance in the first place. So I actually started my career, I did a Fulbright out of undergrad and was an English teaching assistant in Austria. But I came back, and this is where I met Moraya, was in 08, 09, something like that. Met Moraya when we were living in DC. I started my career in international development. So USAID, RIP, and State Department programs. And it's relevant because I was working in youth development and positive youth development, which is really using positive psychology for education and youth development. And just was really disenfranchised with that kind of quote unquote international development model. We would get a grant from the government, from one of those entities, and go implement something in former Soviet Union countries at the time, and hope it worked. It was kind of the early days of even measuring the efficacy of programs. And got my master's at Penn afterwards, the University of Pennsylvania. Go Quakers, Alisha.
Woo!
And we in education and youth development, right? And human development. So continued down that psychology road and positive youth development in that. But also that's where I was exposed to social entrepreneurship and impact investing, this idea that you can run a company or invest for both social and environmental impact alongside the financial return. So ended up out in San Francisco with IDEO.org, a human-centered design firm doing poverty alleviation, and then moved to Texas because my now husband was there, and not as much international development work though in Texas. So somehow found my way into community development venture capital, which is a form of impact investing, where we were doing small business loans to entrepreneurs in the Mexico-Texas border region, and worked with the Ford Foundation and the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas to do some kind of market building ecosystem work. And then got a call from the Wharton School where they were like, oh, we started this thing called the Wharton Social Impact Initiative. We're building out our impact investing work, and we'd love for you to come, work on that. And so I was there for 6 years at Wharton, researching and teaching and doing some early stage impact investing into companies like ours. And then most recently was the head of responsible investing and a managing director at PNC Bank in their asset management group, working with individuals and families, high net worth and ultra high net worth individuals and families, and institutions. So like boards, endowments of foundations and nonprofits, as well as pension funds, retirement funds, things like that. So like very weird path to getting there, and happy to talk more about like why we're doing Calibrate based on some of that work. But I reached out to Moraya and said, hey, I'm thinking about this idea. I know that you are a licensed marriage and family therapist and you know some stuff about tech. Let's talk.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And one quick thing I'll ask you, Nick, before we hand it over to Moraya is, I think a lot of our audience might actually not know what impact investing is. And so if you could just give like the one-liner of what it is, and maybe like what it could mean for anyone who is a new investor.
Yeah. So impact investing is really this idea that you can invest for both the financial return, right? We want to get our money back and hopefully a positive, like more than our money back, while also intentionally seeking an environmental or social impact. So, this Cafe Accelerator, the Center for Accelerating Financial Equity, they're into companies like ours where we want to support people in their financial health or their well-being, better their lives. And so an impact investor might be interested in investing in us because of that thesis, not just the financial viability and business reasons.
I mean, I think that's the whole thing of why, as a therapist, I am even staying in tech, because it's a wild place to build in tech. But that potential bigger impact, so impact investing, can be so incredibly meaningful if done well. And then tech also gives us that place to sort of bring. But I think that's a huge part of like why we're all building bigger tools.
Yeah.
But yes, I'm Moraya. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm the chief clinical strategist at Calibrate, and I'm certified in emotionally focused therapy, which I find really crucial to what we're building, because it's around like that deep and the intimate and really what's happening underneath the surface compared to other kinds of couples therapy that some people are more familiar with, maybe like Gottman method. I'm a very eclectic therapist, so I use sort of all the things and all the tools in my toolbox, as I like to say, but really understanding like what's going on underneath, and then how do we create enough safety so that we can bring that forward so that you're able to connect at a deeper level. And that's so much in what we're building at Calibrate. I think it's also, Alisha, like so much of what I've seen in the work that you're doing in creating community. And I know I've been saying that to you sort of our whole month of knowing each other, where I'm like, what
Which
you're
feels
really
like
doing.
forever. I feel like I've known you guys for way
like
longer
forever.
than that.
It's like going to summer camp almost. That's why I think like, what's a fintech accelerator? I'm sure they're all amazing, but the one we went to, it's like, go to summer camp. You have an amazing camp counselor who like tells you to your face, like how you could make better friendship bracelets. And then you do.
Yes.
And then you hand friendship bracelets out, but really you're just like helping everyone build the things that they're building and the tools, and it's really cool. And it's built, I mean, this is the whole thing. It's like we can be so strong when we feel like we're not alone. And so I think that's what these accelerators do, is they give us that feeling of not being alone, even though we're trying to build things people can't fully see yet.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, well, thank you both for telling everyone about your background and what you're doing at Calibrate. Maybe to kick it off, something Tina and I often talk about is kind of that emotional piece. And Tina, I know you've done some research around this just in terms of younger generations and your lived history and how it affects your money.
Absolutely. So a study from the National Library of Medicine talked about how there is a association between financial worries and psychological distress among adults and the youth. And a certain part that I really wanted to touch on, because it's, of course, a known thing that your financial stress causes like physical stress, all types of emotional stress. However, it also talked about the opposite, which is establishing a deeper understanding of financial worries is important because it can have prolonged detrimental influences on individuals over their lifespan. So I just wanted to touch deeper into that.
I mean, first, I wonder if it's really important to even just ground in maybe just even attachment theory. So, because a lot of things you're talking about is talking about like, yeah, like, stuff that happens in my childhood is going to impact me for the rest of my life. And I think a lot of us move in the world being like, yeah, like for sure, right? but really understanding like what do we mean when we're talking about impact. And so attachment theory is really understanding the ways that we learn from a very young age to connect with our caregivers or connect with the people around us to create safety, belonging. And so it's how we learn in stressed moments, right? Babies cry and they get picked up. There's a really great, if you haven't, it might be worth linking the the still face study from out of Harvard. Have you guys heard of this?
No.
I love it. It's one of my favorite ones. I actually send it to my couples because it helps us understand what it feels like and where it comes from when a partner like still faces us. So like doesn't respond
Is
and
it
the
the
level
one with
of
the
distress.
baby and the mother,
Yeah.
and she's like laughing and happy, and then she's serious, and the baby's like trying to get the attention and like moving and
Yes.
crying literally out for help? Like,
Yeah. So
there's-
take that, right? This is sort of this core attachment theory, right? And it's really, so a lot of your listeners, if they're in school, like they play it a lot in like a Psych 101 class sometimes, right? And sort of understanding what attachment. Now let's overlay some of these more sort of intellectual concepts of money onto that, right? So we have like, well, how do we actually make sense of that in moments of distress? But the distress is around paying a bill versus I need a hug. We all still need that hug too. And so if we think about it, it's coming from that same part of our brain that is wired around connection in distress. And so how did we learn what works? And this is when we have people who are more comfortable reaching out for help when they've had a really healthy relationship with getting a response, or these much more maladaptive ways of reaching out for help in distress. And help could be help me educate myself on it, or help could be actually help me pay a bill. Do I feel safe to ask a parent? Where we think about it's like, well, do they have the money to actually respond with help or the education or the knowledge? And do I trust them? But really, we're going down to that attachment layer of trust is what's really running that driver of when will I ask for help? So that's why I think it's amazing what you guys are building in terms of the 500 Club and just like building community is you're creating space to potentially like jump over some of this asking for help. And it really impacts us throughout our lives. We can obviously go to therapy and create community and do so much healing around it. But ultimately, when we get to that really distressed state, it's going to be pulling from those early attachment years. And then where there was sort of potential trauma and or if there was, if we want to think of trauma through like what was missing. So right now with SNAP benefits going away for many people or gone for many people, depending on the age you are that's happening, you're understanding the world through that lens of now there's not food in my fridge. And that's, it's going to be replaced, but you're going to have that core experience and it happened. We can't pretend it didn't happen.
Yeah. And to sort of bring this even further into the financial context. So in financial therapy, we talk about family financial socialization. And that's really what Moraya is starting to talk about. Like you've got this core attachment and broader family systems within more, let's just say traditional psychology, traditional family therapy, like what's been studied and done. But there's been less research on the intersections of that and money and your core attitudes and beliefs about money and how that starts to sort of shape your decisions as you enter adulthood and then beyond. And so family financial socialization is kind of what it sounds like. It's like, how were you socialized, if at all, around money? Was it discussed in your family at all? Or was it's the great evil? Is it something around like, it's just a taboo? You don't talk about sex, money, or politics. It's like, or was it always talked about and you have a really healthy relationship with money because you were taught the things and it's very similar to a lot of other behaviors that you might learn, as a child. But one thing that the SNAP benefit thing brings up is something that we also call as money flashpoints. So Moraya said, hey, depending on how old you are when this happens, I can tell you that when I was young, my family filed for bankruptcy. My dad went out on his own and started a company, weird, entrepreneur, and it didn't work. And we ended up filing for bankruptcy. And I have a lot of like kind of trauma around that like, have I healed myself or like, do I have a lot more grace around now as an entrepreneur and a dad and a husband? Like I sure do. But at the time, I was 8, 9, something like that, which is a formative time in your childhood, I think, especially for attachment, Moraya. And like, so it's like those things happen. So if you're like if you are a person, a young child, but, with enough wherewithal that you're seeing your parents stressed around what's happening with SNAP benefits, that could potentially become a money flashpoint that influences you and your relationship with money and your decision making well through adulthood.
I'm going to just anchor in like two quick definitions that are important to what Nick said. One is like when we talk about trauma, I think a lot of times we could talk about like capital T trauma, and people sort of go back like, oh, I don't have any trauma, or people will be like, oh, it was traumatic. And what I like to try to anchor us a little bit in is when you think about trauma, it's also thinking about how did the world change and your perception of the world change in that. Because a lot of times people will have something that they'll be like, that wasn't that traumatic, especially thinking about like, Nick, you were okay. Like you still had a place to live when you went through the bankruptcy, your dad's bankruptcy and things like that. And I know lots around Nick's story here. But, it might not be the same as like, oh, it was a tsunami or something like that, where you're like, this was an event. But when we talk about trauma and think about sometimes the one-off, like one events that happen, like a tornado, the world is still, for many people, like my everyday life is still safe and okay. This like one-off experience happened versus when we think of some of these more persistent traumas of like food not being in the fridge, this perception of how safe I am in the world and will I get my needs met. A lot of times people sort of dismiss a little bit of the impact versus like a big like event thing. So I think that's really important. And then as Nick said of like these are really important years. So when we have things that happen in that like 6 to 8 to 9 years, developmentally is so crucial because we can remember it, but also we're really starting to build that identity and how we relate to others in the world, moving away from just our parents being that primary source of connection into that socialization of we're going off to school and we're building how I find belonging in my peer groups. And so then when we have something that shifts in a really major way, it's why I had to move my kid in second grade, like it's really hard on them. So like moving in those windows can be really challenging, even more than potentially of like, oh yeah, I know that was going on for my parents, but Nick, you had to relocate in that window of time, right? Like, so like that part of it, would you say like that was a trauma? No, but your sense of belonging and identity in the world had to shift in this really crucial time window is probably a part of like what's just do a whole moment on you, sir, sort of impacting. And I like to sort of bring that in because when people are thinking about like, okay, was there a big financial trauma in my life? Maybe my parents were going through that. I do know these things. I'm like, but what were those everyday things that shifted because of maybe a big financial thing that was happening? And like, let's make sure you're really, tuning into that and having a lot of compassion around maybe some of those like, oh, that's not as big a deal, but I'm like, that really was a big deal because it happened at that moment in time.
Yeah.
Yes, and touching on that, oftentimes I do a lot of my research in neuroscience and psychology. I'm a big fan. And like they say little T trauma is often more times even, although of course like big T trauma is definitely like it can be weighted heavier. It's also like almost little T trauma is overlooked so much so that you don't even give it attention. That can cause even more distress than even big T trauma that you like work on actively because it's like a specific incident or something that was little T can add up and you can dismiss. I loved how you emphasized that because I do think it's very important. In Nick, as you were saying, when you were 8 years old, this was something that you touched on. I thought about when I was 8 years old and the 2008 financial crisis was a thing. And so I'm thinking about how like that affected me in ways that like obviously it wasn't big T, but it was like just hearing conversations, oh, your parents stressed. And I'm thinking about kids right now with SNAP, like how you said they're waking up to like what's going on in the world. And maybe they weren't even thinking about like, wait a minute, like I grew up with food stamps. So like I can imagine like my mom being stressed or seeing that stress on top of like it's probably a lot for kids right now. And these are like the effects that people aren't necessarily talking about. Like, of course, no, food is super important. That's like your basic needs being met.
Right.
But of course, being the stress of your parents, all of these things, that's stressful. It's uncertainty. And that itself, seeing your parents going through that is just, it's enough to be traumatizing. Yeah. And creating these conclusions around financial instability in life.
Especially when you're so young and you don't personally have the language or the understanding to really get what's going on. There's a level of awareness, as Moraya said, but they're just really stressed. And like, is that because of me? Not knowing that it's some big policy decision. Like you just don't know how that's internalized and translated. Not that, again, parents are doing anything wrong. It just is sort of how development works.
Right. And how no one gives you a toolbox on how to communicate this to your children either. Like that's
Not
stressful as a
yet.
parent too. Like there's a lot of stress happening here.
I guess with maybe the lowercase t traumas that are recurring that we don't even think, we don't even put in the bucket of trauma, but obviously we carry with us. I was actually looking at, so Calibrate has this assessment that, Tina and I have done on their website, calibrateintelligence.com. And we did it before this. And I was, as you were all talking about this lowercase t trauma, I was looking at my assessment and I was looking at some of the areas that I struggle with. And I think for me, it's this fear of dependency. So I worry about having to depend on others financially. I often put myself last and I make maybe too many personal sacrifices, even to meet financial goals. And so I'm just curious, like maybe this will end up being a therapy session for us, but like, how do I work on there must have been lowercase t's across my life that led me to have these kind of pain points. How does someone work on that?
First of all, thank you for both of you for taking the assessment and being open to reflecting on those experiences and seeing your results, and then also bringing them up here. It is a vulnerable place to be. And also, I think sharing our personal stories can be a way to connect with each other and with others. And hopefully the listeners here too can feel a little bit more connected to all of us and reflect on themselves. Moraya is probably best positioned to talk a little bit more about that. But, there are probably more questions, right? Like, in our roles and what we're building with Calibrate, it would prompt us to become curious, to help you be curious around that, and how it shows up in your life and then what might be connected to that. So Moraya, maybe your gears are turning.
So many gears turning. Yeah. So the assessment is 15 minutes. It's totally free. There's no weird upsell thing. That's what I always like to say, because I'm always like, I'm not putting my email address in one more thing. At the most, you get a newsletter from mostly just Nick when we get around to writing them. So it's like, we don't even spam you that much, which is kind of nice, just in case any of the listeners want to go take it. But what Alisha was talking about, I would say, Alisha, like you're jumping into like, here are my faults, my blind spots, which in our system is more around actually like where your strengths get overextended. So it's a little bit around like my gut's like, oh, how do I respond to this thing? Well, what you're going to use your biggest muscles, which is why you and I, we are in different sort of data clusters, if you will. We have these 9 different clusters that people end up kind of landing in, gives you an archetype. So you and I are different ones, but we're pretty close. Humans who think like you and me tend to work really well together, but we work really well together in a way that we can be speeding ships. And we go very, very fast towards a thing often. And so if we talk about financial things, we might miss some small details here and there in the moment, because it's very hard to put a little slowdown. And I don't know if that's actually true for you as a human. It's not how I experience you. But if we really think about when we feel good, and I can speak for my own stuff, is I feel good when I'm like hitting that flow state and I'm moving and it's clicking and it's making sense. And I'm working, like I say to Nick, I'm like, the best form of all of us working together is like that flying V shape, and we're just like going. And so slowing down sometimes feels painful. And so when we think about like healing, how do we approach it, is also can be, well, where is it like actually getting stuck right now? So Alisha, you're a founder in, sort of from what I see on my end in who you are, it makes complete sense. You're able to see into the future and really look forward into like what people need and how can we like meet that need. And then ideally like taking from your lived experience, but then how does it hurt you? And so that's sort of not hurt you, but like, how does it sort of get stuck or frustrated? And like, where's that hesitation? And so someone working with you, like your advisor, would really want to understand, how do I help you pace with what's going on right now in a way that feels good for you versus makes you feel dismissed, or I could actually see, like for myself, like feel very misunderstood.
Yeah.
Because people just try to slow me down in a way that's like not that helpful.
Yeah. I mean, I think Tina can also see this. I like to move really fast and I'm like, go, go, go. And sometimes we're just like, okay, let's take a step back. And I think I feel that impatience even when it comes to my financial goals, because as humans, we often compare ourselves also to those around us. I look at some of my friends and, if they're buying houses and having children and whatever, having these big weddings. And I'm like, well, I'm going to delay that probably because I've chosen, I mean, I have free will, I have choice, I've chosen this path. But then there's like this cognitive dissonance that happens around like the impatience of like, but then I won't reach that goal, like life financial goal. And I think it is, to your point before, around just the accumulation of experiences affecting the way that we think about money. And it certainly is for me growing up, my parents were like, we came to this country so you can have financial stability and, build your financial cushion. And so like, I don't think entrepreneurship necessarily will guarantee that, especially the type of entrepreneurship I'm doing. It's not like a small business. And so because of that, I sometimes tell myself maybe my parents did all of this and I'm wasting it. That's how far I go into that conclusion. And I think that maybe, I don't know if enough like immigrant founders talk about this, but like it was a really difficult decision for me to pursue entrepreneurship because of that upbringing.
Yeah. And Alisha, do you mind if I share one bullet point from your challenges?
Yeah, please.
One of those is feeling the weight of every decision, right? And I'm just struck by that, what you just shared in the spirit of a different way of spinning. It's like, you just don't take things lightly. Like when you decided to jump into entrepreneurship, that was a huge decision. I mean, it is for any of us, but you certainly didn't take it lightly. And when you think about connection and support, right? Like you're going to want to feel that support around you as well because of, the personal sacrifice and then what you're holding space for with your family dynamics as well.
I wonder, Nick, since Alicia's being such an open sport today, so in our work and our methodology, the key here is not to then be like, one, trust that if you've thought things through, you've thought it through. Whereas as much as you're moving fast, you're thinking things through, right? So also trusting that you're communicating that to your team of that thoroughness. But also, Nick, like in the way that we like to work with people is what are Alicia's strengths that's going to help her find deeper compassion, not just being like, it's okay, it's fine.
Yeah. For what I see in your data, it's funny, right? You feel the weight of every decision as maybe a challenge, but one of your strengths is making smart, thoughtful choices. So there's probably an area where you could overanalyze and, get more stressed out, right? And affect your kind of psychological well-being around certain decisions when if you trust, this is an interesting opportunity to be like, if I actually trust that I am prudent, right? And I already make smart, thoughtful decisions. I don't have to ruminate on it. I don't have to sort of overanalyze it.
Yeah. So my recommendation, like, how do we heal these things? One, you should, if you haven't taken it to your therapist already, you should definitely take it.
Meet with my therapist once a week.
Right. My therapist. Yeah. We go deep. But is also understanding that, like, how can you give yourself reminders? So some people will take the assessment and then they play around with it in different ways, hop it into, pick your AI software to be like, let me understand. I'm a
Put it into Kiro.
Literally, that's what I'm saying. Like, take it, upload it. If you guys have the upload feature and or copy and paste feature.
Yes.
Like, no, I think that would be brilliant. And then also then give it to you on a daily reminder. Like if you want to post it on your bathroom mirror to be like, these are my strengths, right? Or put it on the background of your phone. I think that's a great one. Have it in your notes section so that you're able to, when you're sort of feeling the weight, if that's a go-to kind of like, yep, like, is this the right decision? Interrupt it. And so you can do some really nice interruption through simple things like, what's your favorite color? And then you find it all in the room to help ground yourself into your nervous system. But also if you can interrupt it with your true strengths, not just like someone else says, like, put cold water on your face, absolutely works. It's great. Eat some sugar. But if you can interrupt it by saying like, okay, these are my strengths. How do I bring them online so I can use them to my advantage? That's the way to go. But we need that reminder in front of us, not having to go like hunt for something to remind us.
Yeah. I mean, like Tina and I talk about this as well. I think when it comes to like Gen Z and young millennials, just circling back to like our lived experiences, financial crisis, pandemic, really, really crappy workforce. The data came out like this past week that like, I think it's like 20 to 31-year-olds are like the unemployment level is like the highest because all the layoffs happening by all the big tech companies. And I think at Kiro, we're always like, how do you take specific actions when it comes to your finances with all of that uncertainty and with even that emotional piece? And I know Tina and I have worked on it, the two of us together. And Tina, if you want to share any of the stuff you've done and like where you're at now, I think it'll be helpful for our listeners because I think what the two of us are going through, it probably resonates with like a lot of people in this country and in this world.
Definitely. And I highly recommend anyone taking the assessment because it just made me more self aware of little things that they ask. The questions where I was like, wait, I need to think about this. Why am I not doing this? And that goes into what I struggled with. It said that I am the gentle avoider, which is interesting because the things oftentimes that I'm most passionate about or things that I want to know more about, like my finances, it is something that I tend to avoid. With this assessment, it said that. And so, yeah, it says my path forward is insights and action, which is something that I'm just constantly working on. So I feel very self-aware. It's one of those things where it's like, okay, all this self-awareness and like the implementation, like that's the struggle because, even like Kiro, we have this resource and then I still avoid a little where it's like,
Yeah.
what in this generation, and as you were talking about young millennials, Gen Z, like there is no excuse. We have the internet, we have resources. It feels almost overwhelming the amount of information we are constantly fed, social media, all this. So it's like, yeah, I guess Moraya, back to you.
So many things. Well, I guess rather than me be just telling you what to do, because it's so tempting always. Like,
No,
just
please
do this.
do,
No.
please do.
No. How does it feel when you're working with someone, or I could even see, like, honestly, working with Alisha is probably like such a good match for the two of you. Like if I'm looking at you just from a data perspective, I'm like, I bet you two work really well together. I wonder for you, like when someone is able to like build a map in front of you of, hey, this is the next step, let's do one right now, and then is able to like action with you in the moment and then like give you a really clear map forward, not hand holding at all, but to just sort of like show you that path forward. Like, does it often sort of like challenge some of that? Like, you don't even feel the avoidance, even?
No, we've talked about this to be precise about hand holding. I'm like, what's wrong with hand
Yes.
holding? Like, why can't someone hold my hand? Like,
Oh, no.
like,
So you might be
when did we
leading into
become
that
so
desire a little
separated?
strong. Well, my recommendation, so if you were working with a financial advisor directly and I was like sitting in the room interpreting like what we'd recommend, it's less around feeling hand holding and feeling really clear on what those, like what's the step we're taking right now? And then what are those next, like very concrete steps forward? And so that you can see them. Otherwise, I could imagine you're going to sit in a lot of educating of yourself, and hesitation could even be masked through just even, this is really enjoyable to learn, and so that avoidance could be even masked, but you have high self-awareness. So like clearly not someone with a little less self-awareness.
Well, and Valentina, would you mind if I share one bullet from your report?
Sure.
Well,
exposing.
one of them was delegated awareness. And so when we think about it, these are not good and bad. They just kind of are, right? And it's like two sides of the same coin in a lot of ways. So it's like when we're at our best and when like we're like stressed or, scared or whatever. So it's not good and bad. It just is sort of like how we show up. But that delegation piece, right? When you were talking about hand holding, hand holding is the opposite of delegating. But I wonder if like where we hear Moraya say like that path is what's really important, right? But I think it could be easy, like, great, someone give me the path, like, just tell me what to do. But I think when we think about that blind spot, it actually is around a little bit of engagement and co-creation of that path, even more so than just like someone giving you the to-do steps. It's like making sure there's buy-in of that path, and then you'll go do it. That's my guess.
This is true. I am a Libra, so.
Yeah.
When's your birthday?
October 1st.
Oh, on the 16th, Alisha brought me a gluten-free cupcake in New York City because,
Yeah.
like, took note of my celiac disease, and I felt so deeply loved. It was great. And then I got my period. It was great. Love it so much.
Story of our lives.
Well, I don't know about all of our lives, but I go through my stuff too. So I guess like coming back to like your audience and our audience and thinking about financial decision making is like, it's like technology is such a great opportunity to give access to information and products and services that otherwise you had to pay a lot of money, or have a lot of money to access before. And in my view, there's still a few steps that might, hold us up in actually executing on that access and that knowledge and like really building that financial security. So I do think that that's why, with what Kiro's doing and what we're doing, there's like this really cool and potentially exciting blend of just like having that awareness. And then how are we, Alisha, you'll probably laugh. Like we always say, like, are you delivering the right solution at the right time, but then in the right way? And that's like what I think what Moraya and I sort of talk about with Tina, like that's the right way. And I'm not saying we were right, but just like, that's what we mean is like, what's the framing of that, that action step,
we were
that
absolutely
information.
Right. Absolutely correct.
I have to say, so I have a monthly relationship and sex column for Refinery 20. And so like that's how I got into tech actually, is doing a lot of around that. And then a lot of activism work for like, it was early 2020, lots of activism work. But I'm bringing this up because, we're talking about money. We want to anchor in money. I think sometimes it's really easy to actually identify some of these patterns if we look at like other people that were dealing with money. So like if you're in a relationship and sort of extend it out, or I'm really, that's why we're referring to like how you two are working together. And so it's really bringing out all of these different areas where we're touching money, or, you're building a tech startup, is our relationship with money is impacting the decisions that we're making in our business, how we're working with people, how rushed we're feeling, as a way to sort of interpret the data back, I think is a really important thing, because there's a lot, and I would push, you don't have to share on your podcast, but there's a lot of the same things that are related to like how we relate to sex and shame that is showing up like in the patterns of behavior, not because you're like, oh, that's interesting, but because it's a lot of that same kind of fear around belonging that will show up, around money and around sex too.
Wait,
And
elaborate.
actually, no, literally, I was about to ask the same thing, because Tina and I have talked about this, like deep down inside, what do people want? They just want to belong. Like you ask questions, you go deeper and deeper, and it's just belonging. That's it.
Yeah. So when are we afraid, at the most core, like when is our belonging being threatened? Is when we're, sort of feeling vulnerable. So that could literally be like naked with a partner who I don't want to feel that like burn of rejection around, like literally, naked and afraid. Or if we're feeling very attached to being successful, and that's why there's someone's choosing me. And so sometimes it's not really this way that we might think of it's like that person's shallow, but it's been modeled. It's modeled in this system that, this culture that like who is favored, right? People that are more successful. So I think even if you grew up in a home that it wasn't like reinforced so intentionally and directly, it's sitting right there. And so like that's, even the fear of like learning more can be like, I don't want to come across as like being dumb or something like that. And then that can hurt people so much when it comes to their finances.
Yeah. It's a lot. At least what I'm taking away from this conversation is it really just requires you to understand the person that you're speaking with. And that requires a lot of work, number one, because both parties need to be open to it.
Mm-hmm.
And then two, adapting, especially in the context of money and finances, adapting the way that that person executes on any type of financial plan or goals. And that to me that's why I love Calibrate so much, because that's exactly what you all are trying to do as a next step. We're already talking about like ways we can collaborate, but like obviously your focus areas and advice, but like, how do we take that to the masses, And so we are almost on time here. So maybe a question for both of you is, what is your vision of, we're talking biggest vision, North Star of where we can take this, and especially for this next generation that's going through all of this right now over the last decade, like what is your vision for us and for them?
Ooh, girl. No, so here's the thing. So I've worked in finance, circuitous path, right? Like I have my own relationship with money. I grew up gay in rural Kansas, like not feeling good enough. That's what drives my money stories, like all those things, right? So to be clear, there's a lot there. But what I found working in finance, and I kind of don't care who hears this, is like the emperor has no clothes. Like meaning it is scared. Like a lot of us feel scared and there's fear and shame around money. It is going back to the stats that Tina mentioned at the kind of the top of the show. Money's the number one stressor in most American adults' lives, regardless of how much you have. And why do you think that we're in the position we're in? But I digress. So the big vision is I think technology is giving us the opportunity to meet people where they are. And it sounds a little cliche, but democratize access to this information and to services in how to manage our financial lives. And what I love about how Moraya frames some of what we're doing, it's like money's the number one stressor in most people's lives because it touches so many parts of our lives, like where we live, what job we take, like, is there daycare, do we have food on the table? I mean, like healthcare, I mean, you name it, and money or some sort of economic decision sort of underpins it. And so Moraya often talks about like, oh, the parts of your life that, or the people and services that help you adult. And that might be a millennial phrasing. I don't know if Gen Z says that, but like, because we used to be like hashtag adulting, but like the areas of your life that help you manage, your adult and professional lives, your family lives. And if we're able to create a product for Calibrate that helps people do that emotional, relational, and operational complexity of our economic lives, that would be the North Star, like big ass vision for me.
Well, I would add like my big vision, and it's like, feels like more personal. It's like, we've created these tools and then these different paths forward to help people actually move through hesitation and build deeper well-being from like the real science of well-being perspective and create a sustainable life. I want people in positions of power to really see themselves better. This is something because I've always worked with these super high achievers and executive leaders and in different spaces as their couples therapist. So like I'm in the emotional weeds with them. And if people who are, touching money in different ways, guiding people in many different ways, if they're able to understand how they're making decisions, my hope is that they would make better decisions. So it's a little bit different, not in that, goes off of Nick's path in any way, because there's sort of like, how do we get it into the masses? And I'm like, well, there's different definitions of the masses. Because for me, I think that's one of the things that is hurting us so intensely in this moment of time is that we have people with immense power and immense wealth who are just wielding it for their own pleasure and golden pleasures. That I think it's really important to be like, well, someone has to go in and interject into this process in different ways. A big uprising. That's where I'm headed in all this. But also
revolution
all of us
on that.
Yes. Note. Yeah, a revolution. That's really what's needed. To be very clear, we have to tear it all down. That is, please don't cut that. No, I'm just kidding.
Definitely.
Well, no, thank you. Thank you both so much. Yeah, sorry, did you have one more thing?
Quick.
Yeah,
I
please.
just wanted to touch on this because you touch on a huge, I don't even know what to call it, dilemma, not even like a huge reality that we're experiencing in this reality of where we're at in life right now. And I guess I tried to like center and ground myself into like just focusing on the community and lifting each other up is what we can actively not feel helpless or hopeless, right? Keeping that alive. So just a quick ending question from my part is like, what do you think is the healthiest relationship you can have with your finances that has been studied, proven, experience? Like, I know that's like a tough question, but I know like it's always like the relationship you have with yourself. So the relationship you have with your money, it leaks into all facets of your lives.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think there is a self-awareness, of understanding what those core attitudes and beliefs are. And it's just like if you were in therapy, like I have unrelenting standards and perfectionism. That also has to do with my finances. Same. And so I have to work on that, right? But I have to know that about myself first. And like the Calibrate assessment is one tool for doing that. But like I knew that from other types of therapy as well.
Yeah, I would say figure out what wakes up your curiosity, because curiosity is the thing you need to push back fear. And I would focus on that. So less around what you do to avoid, but more around like, if I get really curious, I can be less scared, or just, right, obviously, as we all say, do it scared. And that's the thing I tap into a lot in couples therapy. It's like, can you get really curious about your partner? Can you get really curious about yourself in this moment when you want to just go run away and hide? And so when you're trying to run from your finances, not just the responsibility, but just like looking at them is, okay, what would make me really curious right now? And how do I tap into that? And then can I use that to like push me a little bit forward?
Okay. Thank you, Moraya and Nick. Okay, really quick, how do people take this assessment? Let our listeners know.
We'll send you, so calibrateintelligence.com, but we'll send you guys a lovely link, and it's totally free. So there's not even like a link that has a discount. And then it's confidential to the individual, and it takes about 15 minutes. You just click, go. Don't worry about, is it the right answer, wrong answer? You don't need to prep anything. All the information's inside of you. And I love it when people do it with a partner, a friend, people they're working with, and really able to see the team. Like, our cafe cohort will be able to like see us as a team. Like, do we all have like similar strengths or challenges? I really enjoy being able to understand it like with the community around me. So that's why everyone's taken and everyone in our families have taken it and all of our partners and everything. Yeah.
Amazing.
This is the Thanksgiving icebreaker.
Literally.
The dream. Should I do it for all of my, I go to all my in-laws for Thanksgiving.
Yes.
I could talk to you two all day. By the way, this is a problem.
No,
If you
like, I
want to
want
come
you to be my
back
therapist.
and yeah, sorry, I'm not taking any clients. You want to do a full episode on sex, just like a one-off? Like, how much money are people sending on sex?
We should. Oh my God.
Yeah.
We're going to do it.
When I first got into, I didn't do that much about history of me, but when I first got into private practice, so 13-ish years ago as a couples therapist, it was on porn and sex addiction. And so lots of money related. I mean, people were spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on sugar babies
That
and
was
such.
10 years ago?
I'm old. So
No,
more than that.
I'm saying because it's probably like
Grown
by now. Like,
exactly.
Yeah, there was, yeah. So, and so really worked into being a couples therapist through that lens, which really relates to now being able to like talk about money.
no, and how we were
Absolutely.
talking about like our generation is breaking like these, our parents grew up with maybe more traditional roles. And so it's like now we're choosing what we want. And then the trends come back where it's like, okay, traditional's trending. And then it's like, we're independent. Like, what does that mean? Like the patriarchy though, like they gotta. So I always have questions about this because I'm trying to navigate like what is the healthiest.
Well, if you want to do just a relationship and sex and money one, happy to come back.
Definitely.
Anytime. So fun.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Moraya and Nick. And yeah, we'll make sure everyone tries out the assessment and can talk about us during Thanksgiving dinner. And thank you for letting us have this open therapy session at our money.
This is not therapy. Does this not replace therapy? This advice is not. I'm a licensed therapist. I'm not your therapist.
Yes, this is complimentary and this is an open discussion.
Yeah. Amazing. Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks, y'all.
So much, truly. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.